Let's go back to 1729. A single, unbelievably audacious night raid is about to send shockwaves clear across the Indian subcontinent. This is the story of the Maratha assault on Burhanpur. And trust me, this was so much more than a raid. It was a lightning strike that didn't just plunder a city. It shattered the prestige of an entire empire.
Just imagine the chaos, the sheer panic of hearing that cry. This isn't some distant rumor about an army on the march. This is the sound of a city waking up to find the enemy is already inside the gates. It's a moment of pure shock, and that's exactly where our story kicks off. All right, so to really get how bold this attack was, we first have to talk about the empire it targeted, the Mughal Empire. For all its legendary grandeur, it was kind of like a giant that was starting to stumble, showing some serious cracks in its foundation. For more than 2 centuries, the Mughals were the undisputed top dogs. But by 1729, things were changing. Their grip was loosening. You had constant internal fights, messy succession disputes, and other regional powers starting to rise up. All of this was draining the empire's strength. It was still a giant, for sure, but a very tired, very slow-moving one. And this was the prize. You have to understand, Burhanpur wasn't just any old city. They called it the gateway to the Deccan. It was a super important trade hub and a massive fortress. It was basically the linchpin of Mughal control over the whole southern region. Attacking it was considered, well, unthinkable, or at least that's what the Mughals believed. So you've got an empire in slow decline. And you know what that's a perfect target for? A new, rising power, one that moves with incredible speed and a clear sense of purpose. And the man leading that charge, he was a true military visionary. And here he is, our main character, Peshwa Bajirao I. Now, as the Peshwa, or Prime Minister, of the Maratha Empire, he wasn't just some stuffy politician. Oh no, he was a brilliant and frankly unorthodox general. He saw the Mughal weakness and cooked up a plan that was as bold as it was genius. And this really breaks down his whole philosophy, his secret sauce. This wasn't about lining up massive armies for some conventional slugfest. Bajirao's doctrine was built on 3 pillars. First, cunning. You had to outthink and trick your enemy. Second, speed. You had to move so fast that they couldn't possibly react in time. And finally, courage. The sheer nerve to strike deep, right where they felt safest. So, now that we've got the context set and our key players are on the board, let's get to the main event. We're talking about the night that Burhanpur, the great symbol of Mughal might, fell to a storm it never, ever saw coming. The whole thing kicked off under the perfect cover, the pitch black of night. Bajirao's forces didn't announce their arrival with trumpets or war drums. No, they moved like ghosts across the landscape. You see, behind those huge, formidable walls, the city's governor, a guy named Haibat Rai, and his whole garrison felt pretty safe and sound. They were completely oblivious. Many of them were literally asleep in their beds, as Maratha forces slipped past the outer defenses and closed in on the city itself. And this is the absolutely crucial part. There was no long, drawn-out siege, no big battle outside the gates. By the time anyone inside Burhanpur could have even thought about raising an alarm, Bajirao's elite troops were already flooding into the streets. It was just a masterclass in shock and awe. So the very first thing the sleeping city heard wasn't the clash of swords, but the triumphant roar of victory. Har Har Mahadev! The battle was over almost before it even began. These weren't just invaders, they were conquerors who had materialized out of thin air. And this gets to the real point of the whole raid. Capturing the city was one thing, but the message it sent was way more important. This was a declaration of Swaraja, of self-rule, and it signaled the beginning of a whole new order. Of course, there was the immediate prize. Burhanpur was an incredibly wealthy city, a major center for commerce. The Marathas captured a fortune in gold, jewels, and all sorts of goods. We're talking lakhs of rupees. But this wasn't just loot. This was fuel for the Maratha war machine. It funded their expansion while draining their rival at the same time. And that's the thing to remember here. The plunder, that was secondary. The real target was the Mughal aura of invincibility. By striking Burhanpur, a fortress that was supposed to be impregnable, deep in their own territory, Bajirao proved that nowhere was safe. He completely shattered the myth that the Mughals were an unchallengeable power. This became the message that echoed all across the empire. A raid on a city in the south was now seen as a direct threat to the Mughal capital Delhi itself. It was a loud and clear announcement that the Marathas weren't just some regional nuisance anymore. They were contenders for the imperial throne.
The fallout was, well, immediate and massive. Mughal control in the Deccan was basically crippled. Maratha prestige, on the other hand, went through the roof, which attracted new allies and cemented their power. And, most importantly, this single act served as this powerful declaration of Swarajya, or self-rule, inspiring so many others to fight for their own independence from the Mughals. When you boil it all down, the story of Burhanpur is the story of Baji Raw's philosophy in action. He showed everyone that a smaller, faster, and way more determined force, led by a truly visionary commander, could totally outmaneuver and demoralize a much larger but kind of lazy empire. Look, the raid on Burhanpur wasn't the final, decisive battle or anything, but it was a massive turning point. And it leaves us with this really powerful question. How many other times in history has the future been decided not by massive armies clashing, but by one single audacious act? It just goes to show you that sometimes history isn't written in these grand campaigns, but in a single, lightning-fast strike in the dark.